Well, my grandfather built it, and of course back then it was without sound.
My first memories are when I was really young. We were living out in the valley, and someone said for a special occasion we would come to the show. So we all piled into the old car. It was an old Model A, I think, and came to the show, and we were hanging all over the car, hanging on the fenders and on the running boards. All of us wanted to go. And so we were so excited about going to the theater and getting popcorn and maybe a small treat afterwards. That was my first memory.
I have a twofold relationship with the theater. To begin with, my father managed the theater through 1917 through 1920. His name was Orson Jones Bryant.
We did know each other, but we had not dated at all. He'd come to the theater to see a movie and was in one of the seats, and my sister had invited me to come with her family to see the movie. And the movie had just barely started, and it was dark in here, but we come in and we did find a row of seats. And so she and her family sat down in the seats, and there was only enough for her family. And so we looked, and there was a seat right in front that was vacant. So I said, well, I'll sit right there. So I'd sit down, crossed over somebody, and sit down there and turned to look to see who it was, and it was Jerry.
My first memory was I was living in California at the time, and I came to Cedar City to visit my grandmother who lived here, and we were 3-week vacation, and a movie came to Cedar City called Little Abner. And at that age, I was very young, I really, really wanted to see that movie. And about a day or so before, I fell down and punctured my kneecap. And I was devastated, not so much about the kneecap, but that I wasn't going to get to see Little Abner. So my grandmother arranged for some relatives to come and pick me up and carry me to the theater. And I think that may have been the first movie I ever saw here.
When I was in high school, I was a doorman for when I was a senior, and then the next year. And then when I went to school in Provo, then I was assistant manager to one of the theaters up there. And so when I came down, my neighbor owned the theaters, Glenn Jurgensen, and I asked him for a job, and I worked for about 3 years as a doorman. Doorman at that time would, of course, take tickets. And then we spent quite a lot of time in the theater. We tried after the show started to go down to the theater, make sure it was warm. We ushered older people, especially, to their seats, and a little different than it is now, but and of course we would make sure that we were ahead of all the operation. I was probably about 7 or 8 years old when Granddad used to take me to the theater, to the movies, and of course we lived up the street just a half a block. So we just walked down to the theater and went in and watched the movie, and then we'd go home. And once in a while he'd go back next door to the IGA store, or to the Five and Dime store, and buy me a toy of some kind or another.
When I first came to the theater, my job was as projectionist. I never worked at anything other than the projectionist job. And I started in the early 70s.
And of course, then in those days we had a projectionist, and he was in the booth the whole time because he was switching movies. Okay, in 1941, of course, the war broke out, and I was about not quite 15 at the time.
And by the middle of the summer, the following year, most of the men had gone off to the war and they didn't have anybody to run the projections. So a fellow by the name of John Roberry was taking care of the theaters for my dad's younger brother, Melvin Thorley. And so I asked him if I could have a job, and they said, sure. And so a couple of nights a week, I'd run the projection. And so I did that until I went in the Army.
When we'd have a film break or something like that, the people would start to yell and the lights would come on, and you'd look down in the audience and they were shaking their fists and, get the movie back on, get the movie back on.
And of course, every once in a while, you'd have a little interesting thing happen. And so I remember once I started the arc and forgot to turn the machine on, and so I burned a hole in the film. So I had to turn it all off, take it all out, and splice it together and put it back together. And of course, the audience was giving me a bad time, but I got it back going.
It was kind of hard to come by the ticket money at that time. I collected my money by gathering up old milk bottles and Coca-Cola bottles and selling them for a few cents each. And so money was hard to come by.
And those were the days of Humphrey Bogart and John Wayne. And I mean, they were great movies and attracted huge crowds, some larger than others. One of the largest crowds was for a movie called The Outlaw with Jane Russell. Supposed to be extraordinarily spicy, so of course we had to see it. They didn't have these rating systems in those days. You just went based upon what you read. And it was very controversial nationwide.
I used to remember during the years when the kids in our neighborhood were all of movie age, all the parents would say, well, if Mr. Maxwell says the movie's all right for you to go to, it's all right. If he says no, then you don't go.
And yes, I've seen all of the old Gene Autry, Roy Rogers, Lone Ranger, Cisco Kid, Zorro. I went through all those movies in the 50s, late 40s and 50s. And of course, John Wayne was and still is my favorite movie star.
In the early days, right next to both theaters, attached to it, in fact, you could go in one and right into the theater, you had stores that sold candy and ice cream and malted milks and, and soft drinks.
Oh, I have a sweet tooth. The candy bars was always a favorite of mine. Popcorn wasn't necessarily a favorite, but candy bars were.
The store next door, called the Candy Kitchen, was where we always went to get our drinks and our so forth. That was before you put the concessions in the theater. And so we would go to the Candy Kitchen next door and buy us popcorn or whatever else we wanted to take into the theater.
Oh, the concessions, people complain about how much you pay for concessions, but in all the time I owned the theaters, we never made money on movies. We only made them on concessions.
Well, my favorite treat of all time, still is, was a thing called Seafoam. And it was a little square of seafoam candy covered, not a square, but a rectangular, covered with chocolate and then wrapped in gold foil. Oh man, we thought that was wonderful.
I think the Cedar Theatre and the other theaters here were very important because it was the only thing that was an outlet. There were not a lot of other activities going on in town at the time?
Oh, I would say it's really important. Even though the times has changed and people are getting their entertainment through the TV now, but that don't replace a motion picture, and it don't replace the togetherness that a couple can feel when they attend the movies.
Of course, now it's part of our heritage. It's very, very important, as important now as it ever been.
Well, I think it's always been important. You know, we always, as kids, always spent time at the movies. That was the only entertainment you had, was movies or dance or something like that.
But it is an important function to keep alive in a community, that our youth has some place to go to where they can relate to the past as well as the present and the future.
The Cedar Theater was always our premier theater. I'm glad it's been served.
You know, one thing about a lot of these old buildings, these old structures in towns, small towns, larger towns across the country, is what makes it feasible for them to remain open, remain standing upright, is the support of communities for the businesses that are in there. And that's the one thing that I really want to say a personal thank you to the members of this community, is for the support, for being excited to see this place open again. This building has meant so much for so many generations of people. Rarely does a week go by when we'll have someone say to us, you know, we had our first date here. Oh, you know, I had my first kiss up in a balcony. I mean, just so many different things. People's lives, so many different events and things in people's lives occurred right here over the generations. A lot of memories have been made here. There's a lot of memories yet to be made here. There's a lot of history here, but there's a lot of future here as well.